Okay, so we're running live. Today we're going to be talking about human enhancement. I'll be introducing that a little bit. But what I want to do first is go over the first writing assignment. I've put up an answer key with the grades, but let me just go over it quickly with everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Let's get this going as well to be sure. Okay, so hopefully everybody's doing great. Happy Tuesday to you. Okay, here we are. Okay, so here's the first writing assignment. It's graded. Let's see, let's move this down a little bit so I have access to what I want. Okay, good. So I've got the key up also here so we can go back and forth. So number one, maybe I should say initially, people did really well on the multiple choice generally. So each question was worth 2 points, and there was a possibility for partial credit because there's a possibility for more than one answer. I think there's only one question with one answer. That was number 3. So 1, according to Thompson's bystander case, as discussed in lecture, the correct answer was C. So as discussed in lecture, and as Thompson discussed the bystander case in her paper. 2, according to Thompson's loop case, as discussed in lecture, that's A. So her specific target with the loop case was the formula of humanity. And then 3, according to traditional, so I italicized the traditional there on purpose because when I talked about perfectionism, I talked about traditional versions of perfectionism. They're pluralistic and objectivist, though they don't have to be pluralistic. But just traditionally they are. So like logically, one could be a perfectionist who's an objectivist, but it's also a monist, because they might claim that the thing that's intrinsically good or intrinsically good for us is virtue. That'd be objectively good for us, or objectively good. So yeah, 3, A and C. If you got one of the 2 right, you got 1 point out of the 2. Pretty straightforward there. Number 4, according to a problem with hedonism, as discussed in lecture, C is right. So A and B are problems for desire satisfactionism, or desire theories of well-being, or desire theories of value. And number 5, according to Nozick's experience machine argument, A, hedonism is challenged. He's challenging hedonism, at least in like the initial formulation of the problem, but then he extends it to experience-based theories of value or well-being. And B and C wouldn't fit in that category. So A is the only viable option for 5. Okay, now for the true and false, hopefully the instructions were clear. We did some practice questions together, so hopefully that geared you up for knowing how to answer the true false. Most of you did really well on these as well. So according to the original trolley case, the trolley driver has to decide to kill 1 or to kill 5. Thompson argues that most people she has communicated with about the case claim that the trolley driver must, that is more than required, to kill the 1. Thompson ultimately believes that the reason the trolley driver must kill the 1 is because utilitarianism is true. So as it turns out with this prompt, we've got 3 sentences, and 2 of the 3 sentences are false. So you could have chosen either one, and that would have been fine. But of course, you could challenge both if you wanted to, staying within the word count or even going a bit over, that's fine. As long as you meet the minimum, I'm happy, and you're focused on responding to the prompt. So, so Thompson says early on in her paper that most people she's communicated with, about the case, claim that the trolley driver may, in terms of it being morally permissible, kill the 1, and then others say that it's also morally required to do so. But that's the reason why that second sentence is faulty. And then the third sentence is problematic because Thompson rejects utilitarianism. So utilitarianism can't be used to explain ultimately the moral the moral truth that results from thinking about the original Charlie case that one should kill the one in order to save the five. Okay. And a straightforward challenge to utilitarianism is found just by thinking about the transplant case. And number 7, again, true or false, Bramble claims, that is, believes that Nozick's experience machine argument presupposes a desire satisfaction theory of well-being. This is because Nozick's support for the claim that hooking up to the experience machine is not best for us in terms of well-being is that we wouldn't want to hook up to it. So again, this is because Nozick's support for the claim that hooking up to the experience machine is not best for us is that we shouldn't want to hook up, is that we wouldn't want to hook up to it, excuse me. So let's see. This is problematic, isn't it? Because of the first sentence. So typically when we write, someone claims something, we usually mean that they are asserting it, meaning that they believe what they're saying, because when someone asserts something, they're claiming something that they claim as true. So I put in the parenthetical, that is believed, just so here on after you can know when we say someone claims something that they that implies that the individual or the individual believes it as well. So claiming something involves believing it, putting it forward in that kind of way. Bramble ends up arguing against those who would claim, right, that the experience machine presupposes a desire satisfaction theory of well-being, right? So Bramble shows passages where Nozick explicitly claims that he isn't presupposing desire satisfaction theory of well-being. So remember, in the Bramble paper, he considers several recent objections to Nozick's experience machine. One of those objections is that Nozick's experience machine argument presupposes desire satisfactionism, which then presupposes, right, in and of itself, that hedonism is false. But Bramble claims that that there's textual evidence that Nozick didn't presuppose desire satisfactionism in the first place. He was just that is, Nozick was just writing in such a way, or was using desire talk, as it were, to generate the idea that we're going to have an initial strong desire not to hook up to the experience machine. And then from there, we're able to think about, well, why do we have that inclination, that strong inclination in the first place? So that's why 7 is problematic. 8, value theory is that part of ethics concerned with right and wrong action, and normative theory is about good and bad states of the world. Consequentialist philosophers claim that value theory depends on normative theory. So this is false. There's 2 sentences. Both the sentences are false in it. So value theory is a part of ethics concerned with good and bad states of the world, and normative theory is about or concerned with right and wrong action. So that's why the first sentence in 8 is false. And the second sentence in 8 is false because consequentialist philosophers claim that the normative theory depends on the value theory. So what's right depends on good consequences, right? Or what's morally right depends on good consequences. So rightness is going to depend on what the goodness is, what the good consequences are. But now you're talking about goodness, good consequences. Now you're talking about something related to value theory. Okay. So hopefully it's clear that that when a prompt is true, it's when every sentence in the prompt is true. So then a prompt is false when at least one of the sentences is false. Sometimes you might see prompts that just have a single sentence. That'd be the easy case. But the way I've set things up, just for simplicity's sake, is that in order for a prompt to be true, the entire thing has to be true. And I discussed this when talking about practice questions before. Okay, so just keep that in mind if it wasn't totally clear when you were writing the assignment this time. But again, most everyone did pretty well on this one, or on the true false. Written responses. So number 9, Thompson argues that there's a moral difference between the bystander case and the transplant case. She claims that her answer involves thinking about rights. Does this mean that the moral difference is explained by Kant's formula of humanity? So we were thinking about, Thompson's claim here. Does Thompson's claim mean ultimately that that the moral difference is explained by Kant's formula of humanity, the moral difference between bystander and transplant case? Another way of putting it, as we're talking about the difference between bystander and transplant case, we're talking about the trolley problem, as Thompson discusses it in her paper. And the answer here is going to end up being no, because remember, Thompson argues that Kant's formula of humanity fails, as is seen by thinking about the loop case. So then her solution isn't going to be consistent with a principle that she claims is false, right? So that should be like maybe the initial thing you're thinking is like, okay, we have the formula of humanity. What does Thompson think about the formula of humanity? She thinks it's false. So then surely her solution to the trolley problem isn't going to involve thinking about the formula of humanity. So that's one way of answering this question. And then you can go into, or another way you could go is you could delve into her solution, unpack how the solution involves thinking about rights, and then maybe hint at, or at least mention the fact that Thompson claims that the formula of humanity is false, as seen in the loop case. So there is some leeway here, so long as you get the right answer. My answer here, number 9, what did I write? So it's true that Thompson's solution to the trolley problem involves an appeal to the concept of rights, but this does not mean that her solution involves Kant's formula of humanity, at least in part because she shows that Kant's famous moral principle is false using the loop case. But more positively, Thompson argues that it can be permissible to redirect danger from the 1 to the 5 if the means taken to do so doesn't involve a violation to the rights of the 1. So that's just the general idea, and then we apply it in the next couple sentences. So since flipping a switch onto the tracks of the 1 in bystander isn't itself a rights violation of the 1, it is morally permissible, all things being equal, to kill the 1 in bystander. But since harvesting HP's organs, or the healthy patient's organs, in the transplant case does violate HP's rights, healthy patient's rights, it is wrong to redirect the danger toward him instead of where it was already directed, that is toward the 5 dying patients. So I did a little mix of both in answering the question there, in answering number 9. Okay. And again, we've got the bystander case and the transplant case. There was no need to describe both cases in detail. You can show me that you understand the cases by how you write them in context. Most of you did that, so that was good. Number 10, suppose Seema argues that the reason it is morally wrong to kill the portly fella, Thompson's fat man, remember, in the footbridge case, is that portly fella is killed, which in the end violates his right to life. So the right to life being violated would ultimately be the explanation for the moral wrongness of killing the portly fella in the footbridge case, for killing fat man, Thompson's fat man in the footbridge case, as we called it. Would Thompson agree with Seema's claim? Explain. I was a little lenient on this one, but the answer is no, she wouldn't agree with Seema's claim here. And so part of the answer could have been written here based on what, or depending on how one answered number 9. So if one focused on Thompson's solution to the trolley problem in 9, then the answer was just readily available in 10 for some duplication, but just thinking about, the different cases in question. So here we're thinking about the footbridge case, about the bystander case or the transplant case. So what I wrote, something like this. Number 10, Thompson disagrees with SEMA. Thompson argues that it is sometimes morally permissible to kill the few in order to save the many in cases where danger can be directed to the few away from the many instead. So in footbridge, or the footbridge case, what explains the moral wrongness of killing Porthley is not simply that he was killed for the sake of saving the 5 trolley workers, but because the means taken to kill Porthley as a way of redirecting danger to the 1 instead of the 5 intrinsically involves, or by itself involves, a violation of Porthley's rights. That is, one has to push Porthley off a footbridge in order to save the 5 workers. But pushing someone off a footbridge is surely a violation of their rights. Okay, so remember what Thompson wants to claim is that it is true that that Porthley's right to life would be violated, but the mere violation of the right to life isn't enough to establish the moral wrongness of killing the Porthley in the footbridge case. And this is seen by thinking about the bystander case, for example, or even thinking about the original trolley case. In the original trolley case, thinking about that case, it's a violation of the single person, or the single trolley worker, violation of his right to life that he's killed. But it's morally okay to violate his right to life in that case. And then in the bystander case, the same thing is true, right? It's morally permissible to violate the right to life of the single track worker in the bystander case. So more has to be then said, and that's what's going to ultimately explain the difference that Thompson has with SEMA in my prompt in 10. And number 11, imagine Tuan argues that the correct version of hedonism must involve both higher and lower pleasures. So this is like a theory question related to hedonism. In this way, his view of hedonism is just like Mill's. So Mill has a higher and lower pleasure distinction in his account of hedonism. And I've got Tuan, who is my imaginary person here in the prompt, who has a view just like Mill. So he develops his hedonism and he says, oh, there's higher and lower pleasures, just like Mill claims there was. And the question is Mill's view ultimately consistent? And note, it's full stop. Is Mill's view ultimately consistent? It's not, is Tuan's view ultimately consistent? Full stop, not Mill's view. But of course, Tuan and Mill have the same view. So the question could have applied that way. But is Tuan's view ultimately consistent? Full stop. It's not, is Tuan's view ultimately consistent with Mill's view? Because that seems like it's going to straightforwardly be yes, right? Because they both have a hedonistic view that involves claiming that that pleasure is heterogeneous and it emits of 2 different kinds, the higher pleasures and the lower pleasures, right? So that'd be a really straightforward yes, but try to get you to think about, is Tuan's view ultimately consistent? Just like you could ask, is Mill's view ultimately consistent? And in lecture, we talked about how Mill's view wasn't consistent. So then here you just have to apply it to Tuan. Tuan's view isn't going to ultimately be consistent because this higher lower pleasure distinction in hedonism ends up refuting hedonism at the end of the day. That's why I explain your answer in my lecture discussion of it. So let's go to my written answer here. So Tuan's view, like Mill's, is inconsistent. The basic idea behind hedonism is that pleasure is the one intrinsic good, or the only one intrinsic good for us. Accordingly, it is committed to value well-being monism. Okay, that's hedonism, like full stop. So once a professed hedonist attempts to account for superior human pleasures compared to those experienced by our animal friends, by claiming that some pleasures are qualitatively superior to others, that is by claiming that there is a higher lower pleasure distinction, they commit themselves to value or well-being pluralism. This is because some intrinsic good besides pleasure is needed to account for the qualitative difference between the higher and lower pleasures. And of course, commitment to both value, well-being monism, and pluralism is contradictory or leads to inconsistency. Okay. So here, there were some who claimed in their answers just simply that saying that there are higher and lower pleasures commits one to value pluralism, but they didn't explain the connection between the two. And the connection between the two is going to be shored up by building in the idea that the higher and lower pleasure distinction is a distinction of qualitatively different kinds of pleasures, or distinction that has it that some pleasures are intrinsically better than other pleasures. And it's because of that that you're going to need something, or such a theory is going to need something besides pleasures to account for the difference between the higher and lower pleasures. Okay. So some may have got a couple points taken off because they didn't sort of connect them, those 2 points. The points between the higher lower pleasure distinction collapsing into value pluralism. Okay, which goes against hedonism, which is a monistic theory. Okay, so that rounds out the short answer and the written responses. And so here, if you're curious, I just graded 8, 9, and 10 out of 8 points. So there are 8 points each. Everyone got 1 bonus point then that way. And the way I kind of grade them is just pretty straightforward. If 9 and 10 were graded or were answered just right, and then 10 didn't connect in the way that it needed to, the higher lower pleasure distinction with value pluralism, they got a couple points off. That's kind of how I do things, it's just, and then the 1 point is just, it's just kind of given to you along the way. And then here, the short essay question, I was pretty lenient on grading these. So I didn't write a sample answer here, but there are some good answers, but I did take very seriously like the instructions here. So following the instructions was key. Keep in mind that you got 20 points for just following all the instructions. And so I was really expecting everyone to follow all the instructions here. I expect that anyways, of course, but 20 points just given for just following all the instructions. So there needed to be an introduction, at least 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. In some instances, I got 2 paragraphs, so I got paragraph breaks, but I didn't really get an essay. I got the prompt answered, but I just didn't get it answered in essay form for some. So so points were taken off for not following those instructions there. Another thing to kind of keep in mind here is, as I tried to emphasize in the sample questions I gave you when I went over them, the sample short essay questions, you want to keep that introduction concise, and you need to kind of figure out how exactly to have an introduction that's interesting yet concise. So some of the introductions that were nice and concise that I thought, okay, good, they got the concision right. They didn't quite get the interestingness part right. They just kind of said, they're going to do X and Y, or X and Y, where I'm going to talk about Nozick's experience machine argument, and then I'm going to evaluate it. Well, I knew that's what you're going to do because that's what the prompt tells you to do. So if you could be concise in introduction, but say a little bit more to engage the reader, to give the reader a sense of what's to come, right? In a way that's interesting, in a way that just goes beyond, what I know you're already going to do because the prompt tells me that you're going to do it, right? So one way of making it interesting is to perhaps, in a very concise way, just explain how it is that you're going to talk about the experience machine argument, right? Or provide just a very succinct statement involving your discussion of the experience machine argument, or how you think about the experience machine argument, how you think about presenting it. Because the idea here is you've been taught the experience machine argument, so now it's a matter, can you present it in your own terms, in your own way, to a classmate? I think that's a classmate. That's your audience in the prompt. And then perhaps the easier one is to then, when you say, oh, I'm going to evaluate the experience machine argument, well, tell me like what that evaluation consists in a very concise way, as opposed to just telling me that's what you're going to do. So try to work on that. And again, I mentioned, look, if you're if you needed help with this aspect of writing introductions, and then write something up and let me know, with respect to the sample questions I gave you. That way you had some guidance before going into the assignment. I didn't get very many questions. I think I got one student who showed me a sample short essay that they had written. So, and I was expecting a bit more, so that way students knew what to expect. And so keep in mind that there was an expectation there that if you did have concerns about how to write that introduction, that you would have, come to me, in advance. That I didn't get very many questions. I assume that it would be relatively clear how to do it for the lion's share of the class anyways. So keep in mind, there are further, essays you're gonna have to write where I'm gonna ask you to have very, very concise introductions. You wanna get those introductions right. I didn't ding you too much for not doing that. In fact, some wrote very thin, concise introductions that weren't interesting in the ways that I'm kind of requiring. I didn't take any points off. I just noted, hey, for the next one, be sure to give me a more interesting introduction. So you're going to see further. So if you're having issues or questions about how to refine those introductions, right? There's time. There's time, and there's email, and there's office hours, whatever's needed with that. And I was really looking for paragraphs that connect to each other. So there's smooth transitions between the paragraphs. I'm just talking basic short essay or basic essay writing. It holds for this assignment, for this. When there's abrupt transitions, I think that needs to get worked on, because then it just looks like you're kind of going through the motions and, oh, what does the first part of the prompts I need to answer? Oh, what is the second part of the prompts I need to answer? Okay. It's kind of a tricky business sometimes because I could ask for just straight regurgitation, but then when I ask for straight regurgitation, I get students who complain and all the rest about how, he just wants regurgitation. I'm giving you an opportunity to move beyond the regurgitation and present the ideas in your own way, okay, using your own voice, and writing, constructing an essay. And you have a full week, to do this. So I don't think time is an issue. So part of the reason why I give you the time is that way you have time to think and digest the material, put it in your own way. Okay, so those are just some big picture comments and thinking about the short essay. The introduction was an issue, and then just presenting the answer in an essay form was an issue for some. And so be sure to do that on future short essay assignments. Questions on the assignments. I think that's all I wanted to say there. But by and large, I was pleased with the accuracy of the content, but it's not just the accuracy of the content, it's how that is presented in your own voice, in your own way. You can all go to the slides or, rewind the videos to get the exact content down. I understand that. That's why, right? You got to put it in your own way. Okay. And you may have noticed here that the average for the class was 80. I mean, it's 80, it's a little tricky. Whoops, it's a little tricky because I put 100 on this this assignment here, so it's actually going to be less than that. But that's even tricky, right? So this test student I have here, I gave that student 100% on the assignment. That was me. But of course, if I take away the 100, then right, the value changed, I think, to 79. But the 79 may seem kind of low, but keep in mind, I'm not going to go back because I don't want to, for privacy's sake, I'm not going to show anybody else's assignments here. But I had, I believe, 4 assignments that weren't submitted. They got zeros. So this number should be in the mid 80s. Okay. In the mid 80s, that means that the class did really well on the assignment overall. So I'm just trying to give you, as much feedback as I can. So that way, when the next assignment comes in, you'll have that feedback ready to go and be ready to improve. But there were some really, really good assignments out there. There were some 100% even, like perfect answers. Well, even the answers that were, perfect in terms of content, there were still, comments about getting the introduction just right and all the rest. But yeah. Any clarifications? Any questions that maybe had? If you have particular questions about how I graded your assignment, you can, save that for office hours or email. Okay, so let's go ahead and then turn to today's subject matter. We're going to be talking about human enhancement, at least getting introduced to it. The paper is going to be by Leon Kass, who's a fairly prominent figure in the literature. Okay, presenting one side of it. He's a fairly prominent figure. He's someone in the medical field who had high profile positions with the Bush administration in the 2000s. But I want to do some initial just stage setting, and then we'll stop maybe just after getting in, just a bit after getting into the Cass, and then we'll conclude the Cass and go into more Cass next time. Okay. So the ethics of human enhancement. Okay, so I just had to do like a bit of a for and against and for. I guess that'll be the order when we think about human enhancement. But we need to get clear on like what human enhancement is, human genetic enhancement. So the question is like, what is human enhancement? What is human genetic enhancement? Here's one working definition. So this is not Cass. This is Eric Jungst. So here's a definition that I like. It's biomedically defined. So we're in that domain of applied ethics that's concerned with biomedical ethics or bioethics, perhaps more generally. So here at Cal Poly, we offer several bioethics course or several applied ethics courses. Just a slew of them, and you can take even a bioethics course, which would get really into biomedical ethics. This is sort of an introduction into a topic that you might talk about in bioethics or biomedical ethics. So, so what is human enhancement? So this is Jungst's definition. A human enhancement is a medical or biological intervention to the body designed to improve performance, appearance, or capability besides what is necessary to achieve, sustain, or otherwise restore health. Okay, so again, this is a definition that's biomedically defined. That's why we have this, medical or biological intervention included in the definition. Right? So when you think about enhancement, you should be thinking about improvement generally, right? There's an improvement that's going on when we enhance generally. Just locking in on the relevant kind of improvement that's important or that's relevant. And so it's this medical or biological intervention that improves performance, appearance, or capability, right? Besides what's necessary to achieve, sustain, or restore health. So some philosophers who work in this area, they think that, or they claim that, excuse me, that we can, when we use medical or biological intervention, for the sake of achieving, sustaining, or restoring health, what we're doing is therapeutic. So there are those in the literature who like to make a distinction, even if it's a rough distinction, between enhancement, which is a kind of improvement, which goes above and beyond what's needed, again, to achieve, sustain, and restore health. And then there's, on the other hand, therapy, which involves medical or biological interventions, right, for the sake of, right, achieving, sustaining, or restoring health. Okay, so the distinction between enhancement or genetic enhancement and therapy is oftentimes invoked, I should say, in the literature. And there's debate about the tenability of that distinction. But still, that's one that's oftentimes invoked. Okay. So you might think that, right, when we talk about human enhancement, that's improvement that goes above and beyond what's necessary to achieve, sustain, or restore health. And then therapy is improvement to achieve, sustain, or restore health, right? So they're both kinds of improvements, okay? Enhancement and therapy. Okay. So let's talk about clear cases of enhancement. Clear cases of enhancement put forward by Lynn, Melman, and Abney. So they put together a report on human enhancement. I think it was designed dominantly for human enhancement in the military. It's called the Greenwood Report, if I'm right. And Lynn and Abney, this is Pat Lynn here, Professor Pat Lynn. He's a Cal Poly professor, and so is Abney. I'm not sure about Melman, so don't quote me on where Melman is practicing philosophy. But Lynn and Melman, they're my colleagues here at Cal Poly. They're part of an ethics group. Let me introduce them to you, or at least some of their work to you, if I can, real quick. May interest some of you out there. So I'm going to go to the philosophy department home here at Cal Poly. All kinds of cool stuff here. And you'll note that there's a professor in the department who runs a journal for basically animal ethics issues, issues related to relations between human and animals. But it's this group here that's more relevant to the Lynn and Abney group. So this is the Ethics and Emerging Sciences group, and the head of the group is Pat Lynn. And the basic information about them here on their homepage here at Poly is based at California Polytechnic State University. Woohoo! San Luis Obispo. The Ethics and Emerging Sciences group is a nonpartisan organization focused on the risk, ethical, and social impact of emerging sciences and technologies. You should expect something like that out of Cal Poly, right? This is though a relatively new group. Okay, relatively. I mean, it's been around for a little bit now, but it's just this homepage gives you a sense of the kinds of things that they're interested in, like the future of war, artificial intelligence ethics, and predictive policing. When artificial intelligence in healthcare goes wrong, who's responsible? Gods and robots. Okay, they do consulting. They give presentations at places like the UN. So it's a pretty prestigious group we have here at Cal Poly that's doing really, really cool work in the real world. So they take ethics, they take like philosophical ideas in ethics, and they relate them, at least in many cases, to contemporary issues, contemporary topics. Okay, so if you look at like some of the recent publications, policing again, autonomous cars. So think about the Google cars. Some of you have heard of those things. So the ethics of autonomous cars. A bunch of like AI and robot ethics. So there are actually courses in technology ethics. The course is called Robot Ethics. They wrote a book, Robot Ethics 1.0 and then 2.0. Okay, this just might interest some of you out there. So I just wanted to bring your attention to some of this information that you could readily find on the Cal Poly Philosophy Department webpage. Okay. So the group, I said, it was relatively recent, but began in 2007. Okay. The university being Cal Poly, you might have thought that there was such a group even before 2007. But with the hiring of Patrick Lynn, this group formed and it took off, and it's just doing great work practically in the world. Okay, so this is again Pat Lynn. So clear cases of enhancement or of human enhancement generally: an athlete who is stronger by using anabolic steroids. And these are all examples from the Lynn, Melman, and Abney 2013 report. The Green Wall report, not the Greenwood, the Green Wall report is what it's called. This came back to my memory there. So, be thinking about, how Olympians get caught, or think about how baseball players get caught, or, others who use the anabolic steroids. Even though some of them might claim they're just putting cream, right, flax oil cream or something like that on their arms. No, some of them were taking anabolic steroids. A student who earns better grades by using Ritalin. So not because they have ADHD or some such, but because they use it to improve their performance in the classroom or on exams generally. or a soldier that can run for days using drugs that trigger the same metabolic processes as had in Arctic sled dogs. So these need to be anabolic steroids, these could be other kinds of drugs that are produced pharmaceutically. Okay. Right. You might even think that in the past, how the Second World War and how across the board the soldiers in the various armies, how the soldiers were given methamphetamines, Pervitin, these kinds of things. Those would be considered as enhancements. Okay. An officer worker has a computer chip implanted in his brain that gives him instant access to databases and search engines, right? So these are all supposed to be clear cases of enhancement. Now, remember earlier I said that many make a distinction between enhancement on the one hand and therapy on the other, excuse me. But so some, again, they don't think that's a tenable distinction for various reasons. But the more general distinction that we can think about is the distinction between enhancement on the one hand and non-enhancement on the other. Whether those non-enhancements count as therapy is another question. Some of them I think you're likely to say would count as therapy. They might be clear cases of therapy even. So I just went more general here and distinguish clear cases of enhancement from non-enhancement, as opposed to making a distinction between clear cases of enhancement and clear cases of therapy. Even though there will likely be some overlap in your thinking about these things. So this is Keith Abney. So he's someone who's part of that ethics group that I mentioned a moment ago. Teaches quite a few ethics courses, including applied ethics courses here at Poly. There he is. It looks like Shell Beach, California, the cliffs. Maybe some of you know that area. Beautiful area here along the coast. So a muscular dystrophy patient using anabolic steroids to regain strength. Supposed to be a clear case of non-enhancement. And you're likely to say, oh, that counts as a form of therapy, right? We're using the anabolic steroids therapeutically to help a patient who's suffering from a disease. Okay. Keith Abney was one of my professors back when I was a student at Cal Poly. So shout out to Keith here. An expensive prep school education to enable a student to get better grades. Okay, so this is likely when you're not going to consider therapy. So, but the first example does seem to be. So it seems like this is an enhancement. There is debate about this, as you can imagine. Some people actually, this would count as a case of enhancement, right? That kind of improvement in this regard. But most people tend to think that it's perfectly fine for parents to send their students to expensive prep schools, so long as they have the means to do so. This seems to be in line with just a kind of, beneficence or duties of beneficence that parents have, relevant to their children, of course. A vehicle that can transport soldiers for many days. So, the second and third bullet points here, just kinds of improvement, right? Cases of, improvement. They seem to go beyond thinking about things, biomedically. Okay. And then a smartphone that enables a worker to check email and look up their information. So the only real example here that seems to be a biomedical one in response to, or in contrast with the previous slide, is the first example here. But it might be that just thinking about these kinds of examples that are non-biomedical can help us with thinking about the biomedical cases where we say, oh, those aren't cases of enhancement, they're cases of non-enhancement, or cases of therapy or some such. Okay. Just to round things out here, Lynn, Melman, and Abney, they give us examples of disenhancement. And I put a question mark here because some people, like in the disability literature, for example, might disagree with the examples. But I just wanted to be sensitive to that. So deaf parents who want to select for in vitro embryos have to have deaf babies. So these are actual cases that we have. If I'm right, the most recent case that I know of that I've read about regarding deaf parents who want to select for in vitro embryos to have deaf babies, that was a case that occurred in the UK. I thought is that a disenhancement for the deaf parents to select for deaf babies? Okay, there's some in the disability literature. There's some who are in the disability community or in the community of, being hearing impaired and the like, um, more exactly, or perhaps more neutrally, who would claim that it's not a disability in the first place to be deaf. Okay, the kinds of arguments um, that the parents had in this case, if I remember correctly from the articles I read a little while back, were that they wanted their baby to their children, etc., to be part of the same community that they're part of, and to interact with them in the same way that they interact with others in their community. And they didn't see it as a kind of a disability in the first place, or as a disenhancement, to use that terminology. And patients who want to amputate limbs because they feel foreign. So if this case isn't convincing to you as a clear case of disenhancement, maybe the second case that would. So those who have certain, psychiatric conditions that lead them to want to have their limbs amputated. And presumably having limbs amputated counts as a kind of disenhancement. Okay. So that was just to round things out here. So you get a little sense of the terrain. So we'll come back to this. I just wanted to, no, maybe this would be a good idea. Do this first. Yes, do this first. Here's some medical techniques that are related to enhancement. So this is Nicholas Agar. He's another figure in the area who's for enhancement, but in a limited kind of way. Perhaps next week I'll be able to say a few things about his view, just some brief things. But this is Nicholas Agar. He's one of the key philosophers in this area. And so one medical technique that's used for biomedical enhancement is PGD. It's the method of selection. So we use PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And so what we do here, using the method of selection, is as embryos are created via in vitro fertilization, and then embryos are grown to the 8-cell stage. A single cell is extracted, and then the DNA is analyzed. And then the analysis reveals whether the cell should be used or discarded. So by analyzing the DNA, they might find that there are certain mutations or other problems. And if they find that there are problems, or they find that some genetic expressions are predictably problematic, then they can, in some cases, dispose of those embryos, and then perhaps parents can try again, right? So this will happen with in vitro fertilization when someone, an individual or a family, is trying to get pregnant, or someone with a partner is trying to form a family. A family that involves having children, of course. And so, as you can imagine, there has been quite a bit of debate about whether or not it's permissible to just grow embryos in petri dishes to then just dispose of them. So some would want to say these embryos, they're human beings, they're the very, very tiniest among us, and so we have perhaps significant ethical obligations to them. There's some who want to claim that embryos that are grown to the 8-cell stage, there's no distinct individual there. There's nothing that is like morally significant there. It would be a mistake, they might claim, to say that such things are the tiniest among us, right? As being one of us. So there are debates about these things, and if we were to focus on something like some of the stem cell research debates that were really big in the 2000s, early 2010s. We would get more into this and discuss these issues more. One issue is obviously going to be whether or not we're going to want to say that something that an embryo that is, or a zygote that is is only 8 cells in terms of its size, right? In terms of its structure and organization, whether or not that is something that would something that should be considered an individual human being in the first place. Okay, that's a big question, obviously. Okay, so this is one of the medical techniques that's used for human enhancement. Okay, we select the embryos that seem best off genetically speaking, and then we'll implant those ones in the uteruses of females. Okay, the next kind of medical technique that we'll use in enhancement is modification. So this is like genetic engineering. So maybe what you initially thought about when you thought about human enhancement. So the modification here currently involves genetic engineering. This is a more powerful technique compared to just screening embryos, doing tests on cells taken from those embryos. But here we actually modify the genome, right, using various technologies that have become available to us. So one such technology that you may be familiar with that's become or made its way into the mainstream in some ways is the CRISPR technology. So let's have a quick look. I found a really quick YouTube video that captures what CRISPR is about. I think it's just maybe close to 2 minutes in length. I'm not going to test you on the biology stuff that's in it. Some of you who are biology majors, this will make more sense to than the non-biology majors, but that's okay. This will just give you a sense of what genetic engineering looks like, at least in terms of one of its technologies, one of its most well-known technologies, CRISPR. So yeah, just a basic idea here. So I'll just minute 18. Here we go.
Scientists have long imagined being able to make specific changes to the genetic code of a cell or organism. A revolutionary genome editing technology invented by scientists at UC Berkeley and Umea University makes this possible using an RNA-guided protein called Cas9. Cas9 searches through the cell's vast genetic material until it finds a sequence of DNA that matches the sequence of its programmable guide RNA. The guide RNA enables Cas9 to open the DNA helix, then to position 2 molecular blades to cut each strand of the DNA double helix. Repair enzymes seal the gap in the broken DNA, sometimes by inserting new genetic information supplied by the cell or the experimenter. In this way, disease-causing mutations can be corrected by changing the underlying genetic code. Scientists are now using this Cas9 technology for research applications in human health, agriculture, and bioenergy.
Yeah, so there you see, you can get a sense of how there's these processes that occur at the micro level, right? Wherein we can actually do gene editing and we can cut the DNA strands where we need to. The video here seemed like it was gesturing more towards using these technologies for the sake of what we might call therapeutic purposes, but there's no reason why we couldn't also for the sake of enhancement purposes. I mean, just in terms of using the technology for those purposes. There's obviously ethical questions about whether or not it's morally okay to do so. That's why there's an ethical topic here that we're discussing. So anyways, hopefully that gave you just a glimmer, a sense of what happens when we modify as opposed to just merely select in our enhancement process, or biomedical enhancement processes. If I'm right, there's a Netflix series maybe it's called Unnatural Selection, if I'm right. It's a series, if I'm remembering correctly, and it goes into some pretty cool detail on, it tells stories as well that make the material more manageable and digestible regarding CRISPR and that technology that's available. So that may interest some of you. Pretty sure it's called Unnatural Selection. Okay. Okay, playing off the idea of natural selection, right, which obviously is a crucial part of Darwin and neo-Darwinian theories of evolution. Okay. Good. Whoop. All right, good. So let's just maybe canvass a couple of the positions in the debate. The main positions, there could be more nuance than what's presented here, but this gives us a basic idea. So this is Nicholas Bostrom. So he's someone who's a key big figure in ethics, applied ethics, bioethics, biomedical ethics. He's at the University of Oxford. And the pro-enhancement side of things, sometimes it's called the pro-humanist side, or the side of transhumanism. So, quote, transhumanists, this is a passage from Bostrom, transhumanists promote the view that human enhancement technologies should be made widely available, and that individuals should have broad discretion over which of these technologies to apply to themselves. Okay. Sometimes this is called in the literature morphological freedom. And that parents should normally get to decide which reproductive technologies to use when having children. Okay, and this would obviously support the idea of reproductive freedom. So this is the transhumanist side, the pro-human enhancement side. We should be able to use these biomedical technologies for the sake of improving our lives, not merely for the sake of recovering from disease and all the rest. Okay, so not merely for the sake of therapy. Okay, so that's one side. Now the anti-enhancement side, sometimes they're called bioconservatives. So the bioconservative side, this is another quote from the Bostrom 2005 paper he put together. So prominent bioconservative writers include Leon Kass. So that's someone who we're going to look at in some detail this week. Francis Fukuyama, George Annis, Wesley Smith, Jeremy Rifkin, and Bill McKibben. One of the central concerns of the bioconservatives is that human enhancement technologies might be dehumanizing. The worry, which has been variously expressed, is that these technologies might undermine our human dignity or inadvertently erode something that is deeply valuable about being human, but is difficult to put into words or to factor into a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the bioconservative side. If you're curious and wanted to read some Bostrom, so I cited his 2005 paper, but he has a co-written paper with Rebecca Roach, which is a nice introduction to the human enhancement debate, presented at least somewhat neutrally. So it's one that I toyed with teaching along with Bostrom's 2005. So I like this paper. I like to recommend it because of really nice introduction into human enhancement, and then gets into the discussion between the therapy enhancement dichotomy. Right. So in the second paragraph, an enhancement is typically contraposed to therapy, as I've anticipated. In broad terms, therapy aims to fix something that's gone wrong by curing specific diseases or injuries, while enhancement interventions aim to improve the state of an organism beyond its normal healthy state. And then Bostrom and Roach go on to claim that this distinction is problematic for several reasons. And they spend quite a bit of time talking about the issues that arise when we try to make this distinction. So First, we may note, just to continue here a little bit, that the therapy enhancement dichotomy does not map onto any corresponding dichotomy between standard contemporary medicine and medicine as it could be practiced in the future. Standard contemporary medicine includes many practices that do not aim to cure diseases or injuries. So then are those going to count as enhancements then? Doesn't seem like they should. So it includes, for example, preventative medicine, right? Palliative care, obstetrics, sports medicine, plastic surgery, contraceptive devices, fertility treatments, cosmetic to dental procedures, and much else. Are these all enhancements? Do they fit into the enhancement category? Or are they all therapy? Where are they actually going to fit? So there are going to be issues with where we're going to put these current medical practices or aspects of or parts of medical practices. Okay. Right. Right. And then one of the things I wanted to just mention is kind of came to mind, just given that we're at a time when vaccinations are a big deal. So second, it's unclear how to classify interventions that reduce the probability of disease and death. Okay, so are these going to count as therapy or are they going to count as enhancement? Vaccination can be seen as an immune system enhancement or alternatively as a preventative therapeutic intervention. Similarly, an intervention to slow the aging process could be regarded either as an enhancement of a health span or as a preventative therapeutic intervention that reduces risks of illness and disability. So vaccinations are going to be a problem case for the distinction between enhancement on the one hand and therapy on the other. Okay, so they go on and give other reasons from there. Okay, so that's just to present to you, introduce to you a paper that some of you might be interested in checking out if you're interested in going a bit deeper. This is a nice introduction. Rebecca Roach is a colleague of Bostrom's at Oxford, at least that's where she was last I remember. Okay. Yeah, vaccinations obviously a major topic currently, given the COVID-19 vaccinations. I myself have received both doses of the vaccination, the Pfizer vaccination, not because of not because I'm a teacher, but because I do nonprofit work on weekends, working with disadvantaged members of the community, and quite a few of them. So I'm in regular contact with lots of the large percentage of certain populations here in San Luis Obispo County. So anyways, let's see here. Back to the presentation here. So we're going to begin with the bioconservatism. We have just a few minutes here. I want to just maybe say a few things about the Kass, and then we'll call it a Tuesday, and we'll save the rest of Kass for next time. Hopefully, though, you're feeling like you have a sense of what human enhancement is, what the debate is about. I think that the passages from the Bostrom 2005 piece, they kind of set things up nicely. They set up the debate nicely. Okay. Good. So there's Leon Kass. He's a U.S. physician. He's a scientist. He's a public intellectual. As I noted, he was a prominent figure in George W. Bush's administration. He was part of his Council on Bioethics. So George W. Bush had a conservative view on the issue of stem cell research. So there was quite a bit of scientific promise that that stem cell research and the technologies that emerged from that research could have an impact on diabetes or help with patients that have diabetes, Alzheimer's, and a range of other diseases. But Kass and Bush following Kass's lead, at least in part. I think there were also religious considerations and others that played a role in forming Bush's policies, but they opposed the research and the technology emerging from the research because they took embryos to have significant moral status, even embryos that are 8 cells in size. Okay, this is one thing that George W. Bush ultimately took some heat for from large percentage of our population here in the U.S. So the paper from the Kass is Ageless Bodies, Happy Souls, Biotechnology in the Pursuit of Perfection. So from 2003. Okay, so this would have been while the second Bush, George W. Bush, was president. Bush won the presidency the first time in 2000. He was president until 2008. So here's Kass's project, the focus of the project. Let's go to the Kass paper, though, maybe really quickly before we get to that passage. So he begins this. So this is just the author's note at the top of the page. The following essay was originally delivered as the inaugural lecture in the Technology and Society Lecture Series at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Although it's still very much a work in progress, I'm honored to be invited to contribute it to this inaugural issue of the New Atlantis. So he begins, let me begin by offering a toast to biomedical science and biotechnology. May they live and be well, and may our children and grandchildren continue to reap their ever tastier fruit, but without succumbing to their seductive promises of a perfect, better than human future in which we shall all be as gods, ageless and blissful. So let biomedical technology be good for us, okay, but don't allow it to seduce us into thinking that we're going to have perfect transhumanist futures where we all live as gods, right, ageless and blissful. So that gives you kind of a sense of the project that's coming. Just think about the title of the paper, right? Ageless Bodies, Happy Souls, Biotechnology in the Pursuit of Perfection. And ultimately, what Kass is going to want to say is there's certain limits to be taken as we try to live healthily, right? Have healthy bodies, right? And as we try to have happy psychologies or happy souls. Okay. As nearly everyone appreciates, we live near the beginning of the golden age of biotechnology. For the most part, we should be very glad that we do. We are many times over the beneficiaries of its cure for diseases, prolongation of life, and amelioration of suffering, psychic as well as somatic. Okay, psychological as well as bodily might be okay. Another way of putting the clause there at the end of the sentence. We should be deeply grateful for the gifts of human ingenuity and cleverness and for the devoted efforts of scientists, physicians, and entrepreneurs who have used these gifts to make those benefits possible. And mindful that modern biology is just entering puberty, we suspect that its finest fruit is yet to come. Okay. Yet, notwithstanding these blessings, present and projected, we have also seen more than enough to make us anxious and concerned, for we recognize that the powers made possible by biomedical science can be used for non-therapeutic or ignoble purposes, serving ends that range from the frivolous and disquieting to the offensive and pernicious. These powers are available as instruments of bioterrorism, for example, genetically engineered drug-resistant bacteria or drugs that obliterate memory. Okay, so think about bioterrorism and how it was on the rise and perhaps continues to be as agents of social control. And sometimes the bioterrorism occurs as states inflict them on their citizens in various parts of the world. Again, as agents of social control, for example, drugs to tame rowdies or fertility blockers for welfare recipients, and as a means of trying to improve or perfect our bodies and minds and those of our children. For example, genetically engineered super muscles or drugs to improve memory. Anticipating possible threats to our security, freedom, and even our very humanity, many people are increasingly worried about where biotechnology may be taking us. We are concerned about what others might do to us, but also about what we might do to ourselves. We are concerned that our society might be harmed, that we ourselves might be diminished. Indeed, in a way that could undermine the highest and richest possibilities of human life. So that's the beginning of the Kass paper. And then he focuses his project. Okay, so those problems are like bioterrorism and controlling people who, would be welfare recipients, et cetera. These kinds of fears that we have about nefarious actors at high levels and all the rest in powerful places, worthy concerns. But Kass's project here, he gets focused here on page 11 of his paper. Better to begin with the likely ends that these powers and techniques are destined to serve, the powers and techniques of the enhancement technology that we get from the biomedical field, the biomedical research. Ageless bodies, happy souls, better children, a more peaceful and cooperative society. Leaving aside the pursuit of optimum babies or better citizens, I will concentrate on the strictly personal goals of self-improvement, those efforts to preserve and augment the vitality of the body and to enhance the happiness of the soul. So this is going to be the focus. Okay, strictly personal goals. So like self-improvement ideas, right? Those efforts to preserve and augment the vitality of the body, to have a healthier body, and to enhance the happiness of the soul, to have a happy soul, happy psychology, to be happy. Okay, so it's going to set these major topics aside and focus on these instead. And ultimately, he's going to be skeptical that we should use enhancement for these strictly personal goals related to self-improvement. Okay, so that further refines the project. So now just clearing the ground, we'll go for a couple more minutes here. Clearing the ground here. Why should anyone be worried about these prospects? Why should anybody be concerned about these personal goals of self-improvement, using biomedical technology to improve our lives in these ways, our personal lives? Okay, setting aside the sort of larger projects that could affect, populations. Why should anyone be worried about these prospects? What could be wrong with efforts to improve upon human nature to try with the help of biomedical technology to gain ageless bodies and happy souls? To have bodies that, right, that just continue living, right, much longer than they currently do. So we're continuing along past the trajectory of human history in the developed world, where people are living longer, bodies are living longer, life expectancies are longer. And of course, being happy has always been something that we're concerned with in terms of our personal goals related to self-improvement. A number of reasons have been offered, but looked at closely, they do not get at the heart of the matter. Okay, so there have been various reasons offered for what could go wrong, right, with using biomedical technology to improve ourselves, such that we live longer and that we're happier, to put it simply. And that's those reasons oftentimes related to, or oftentimes laid out as, the health objection reason, the equality objection reason, and the liberty objection reason. So the idea is just basically that ultimately biomedical technology that we could use to try to improve our lives, to improve the health of our bodies and the happiness of our souls, could actually end up being counterproductive and lead to unhealthiness. Or there's a concern that there's only going to be some people who have the ability to self-improve by using the biomedical technology. So you'll have a society of the enhanced and a society of the unenhanced, and there's inequality that could emerge. And then there's the liberty objection. The biomedical technology might actually count against our freedom and our liberty. And these objections have been run by those who are on the bioconservative side. And the crucial thing here is that Kass is going to develop them, but show that they ultimately fail. So what Kass's project is going to be from this point here is to discuss these reasons that have been offered in the literature for rejecting human enhancement. Even if we're thinking about human enhancement as restricted to personal improvement goals. Okay, ensure that but ensure that these objections fail, but that doesn't mean that there aren't objections that can be developed against using human enhancement for the self-improvement goals already discussed. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and stop here because I want to go through these objections more carefully next time, and then talk about Kass's reply to them. And then we'll talk about Kass's his objections, the ones that he thinks prevail, and at least go a significant way towards casting doubt on using enhancement, biomedical enhancement technology for the sake of improving ourselves, improving our lives in terms of our self-improvement goals. Okay, so we'll stop there. We'll go ahead and stop sharing. Any questions or comments on anything that was discussed this time? Anything I can clarify? If not, then I'll go ahead and stop recording. And I'll see you all on Thursday. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.